Major support for Do the Math has been provided by Chevron, the Kern County Superintendent of Schools, Edison International, Valley Strong Credit Union, California Resources Corporation, Bakersfield West Rotary Stroop Family Foundation, Panama Buena Vista Union School District, Bakersfield City School District, Kern High School District, and AC Electric Company, with additional production assistance provided by these supporters of education in Kern County and throughout the state of California.
Today we are with Baker's Outpost, and we're with owner Laura Journey. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you.
Laura, can you kind of give us a little bit of background on yourself?
Yeah, so I've been baking for a little over a decade, pretty seriously. I started baking when I was quite young, with my grandmother in the kitchen. It turned into more of a passion-turned business a few years ago with the bakery. And yeah, so we've been here for about 3 years with Baker's Outpost.
And last year you kind of gave us some examples of the many different types of breads that you bake. Continuing on, I know that with all COVID-19, a lot of people are baking at home and trying to find yeast and flour and things like that. It's been really difficult, and actually just trying to find things that we can bake at home. Any advice or anything that you're seeing?
Yeah, I know it's been quite challenging. I think things have eased up a little bit now, but we can actually do quite a few extraordinary things in the kitchen with very few ingredients. So today we'll be looking at a cake recipe with just a few ingredients that you should be able to find around your house.
Now, you're talking about ingredients because you're a professional baker, and I know with professional bakers you deal with a lot of weight and volume, but a lot of home bakers, we don't. Me being one, we don't deal with the weighing things out and doing by volume. Can you kind of go into that a little bit?
Yeah, baking's more of a science, so it's not like adding a pinch of this, a pinch of that into a sauce, and it requires a lot of precision in weighing. So last year we spoke about weighing and using grams in a scale. There's also another way of using measurements, and that is cups and teaspoons, and a lot of baking uses fractions. So today we're going to focus on fractions.
I kind of want to go a little bit more into fractions because obviously with math and I know you have that cake recipe for us. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people are scared of fractions. A lot of students are, and other people are just like, I love fractions. But baking is a perfect example of fractions, mm-hmm. and they are kind of fun. Can you kind of go a little bit more with that?
Yeah, so the most common way that we use math in baking is with fractions. Fractions are a huge part of baking. All the measurements in the U.S. deal with cups and teaspoons in fractions, so goes down from choosing the right measuring cup to comparing sizes and then later doubling and converting.
All that. Now, you're from Canada, correct?
Yes.
Now, in Canada, are you metric system or?
We are, and so we do a lot of things with ounces and grams and things like that. So we will touch upon that actually in the recipe. There's something with the butter we'll come across where I will show you how we can do it Canadian way, the American way, and how we use different measurements around the world.
Now, was that difficult for you as a little kid or coming here as an adult to convert between the two, or is that something that you had already learned in mathematics?
It does throw me off. For instance, when I go to the grocery store to order deli meat, for instance, I go to order it in grams. Here it's ordered in pounds, so that's one thing that I still have to stop and think about. But I've pretty much mastered the concept. We also were taught it in school in our math back home as well. So I've grasped it pretty well, and then being a baker and using it every day, it's just become second nature to me. But the fractions I know kids tend to get hung up on. So hopefully we can make it a little bit more fun and a little bit easier to understand.
And we are back with owner Laura Journey from Baker's Outpost in her kitchen, getting ready to bake a cake using fractions.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. So looking at fractions, if you don't know what fractions are parts of a whole. So today we're looking at a very simple cake recipe. You should be able to find all of these things pretty easily around your house. I know sometimes flour has been a little bit tricky, but I think we are back to normal here. So we're gonna take this recipe and we are going to double it. So you can see here we've got a bunch of fractions in our recipe. So we're gonna start off with the butter. So we've asking for 1/3 of a cup of butter. So to double it, we can add it or multiply it wherever you're at with your math. And here we've got 2/3. And another way to look at that is if we've got a chocolate bar, and you break it into thirds, and you eaten 2/3 of the whole chocolate bar.
And that, again, looking at that, we know we're adding our numerators, but our denominators, we have the same denominator, and that's what we want, and we keep it the same, hence the 2/3.
Yes. So here at our double cake recipe, we now have 2/3 of a cup.
Is it,
Of
do you
butter.
always write down your change in recipes? Do you keep a journal when you change up recipes?
I do. So I have numerous recipes where it's the basic dozen, and then I've multiplied it 6 times, 8 times to get the quantity that I need. So if I need 144 cookies, I, double it 12 times, multiply it 12 times to get the appropriate number.
Okay, after our butter.
Okay, so we are going to work on, we've got 1.5 cups of sugar. So we're getting a little bit bigger fractions here. So we've got 1.5 cups of sugar, and we're multiplying it by 2 or adding it twice. So here I would take that we've got 2 wholes, and then we're left with 2 halves. So how are we going to figure out half plus half? We know that if we've got a cake and we cut it in half, and I eat this half, and you eat that half, we've got a whole cake gone. So we know that 1/2 and 1/2 equals 1 whole. So we're going to come back to our 2 and add 1, which equals 3. So we know now that 1.5 plus 1.5 equals 3.
So we have 3
So
cups
we
of
have
sugar.
3 cups of sugar. It sounds like a lot.
That's a
doesn't
lot
it?
of sugar. is what
Sounds
I
like a
was
lot of
thinking.
sugar, doesn't it? And so now we move on to our eggs. And that's a pretty simple one. We've just got 1 egg. So if we have 1 and we need 2, we can add 1. And if you're multiplying the recipe, we know that 1 times 2 is also 2. So we're using 2 eggs in our recipe. And this gets a little trickier when you have the recipe and your recipe calls for 1 egg. What do you do with half an egg? That can be a little bit trickier, but we will not get into that today. But it is one of those things that it can eventually make things a little bit challenging when you're having things. So again, we've got 1 teaspoon of vanilla. We know that that is 2.
Because
We have doubled it or added 1 plus 1. And then here moving on to 1 3/4 cups of flour, again, we get into the bigger fractions and can be a little bit scarier. So we have 1 3/4, and again, we're adding 1 3/4. So here you can see that we've got 2 wholes. So I'm going to write that here. And then we're going to add 3/4 plus 3/4. And so we see now here that we've got the common denominator. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add the 3 plus 3. Which
Over 6/4, yeah.
gives you 6/4.
Fourths. And right there, we're going to pause a minute because we're looking at that and we have an improper fraction, right? And so there's going to be more math that we're going to need to get into. We are back at Baker's Outpost with Laura Journey, owner, and we are in the middle of doubling a cake recipe. And we kind of left off with measuring the flour because the flour is not that quite easy as like a half or a whole. We
Right.
have the 1 3/4. And we kind of left it as improper fractions, so let's continue on.
Right. So we need to simplify it here. So we know that we've got 6/4, and to get that simplified, 4 goes into 6 one time, and then we are left with 2/4, which breaks down to 1/2. So here we know that 3/4 plus 3/4 equals 1.5. So coming back to our whole number here that we have the 2 cups of flour, we're going to add 1.5 cups of flour. 2 plus 1.5 equals 3.5. So here we've got a total of 3.5 cups of flour.
And a lot of times when students are breaking that down, they forget to add those whole numbers back. And I like how you brought that back
Right,
to it.
yeah.
Because a lot of times they forget to do that.
Yeah, with my daughter's math, it's one of the things I've been focusing on is to come back and don't forget that number that you've got to add. And so we've got our flour calculated here. Now we're moving on to something, it's a little bit trickier for some. We're working in teaspoons. So it's asking for 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder. So we've got our 2.5 and either multiplying or adding it. We can see that our whole numbers here, 2 and 2, are 4. And then we're left with our 2 fractions, 1/2 plus 1/2, which we know equals 1 whole. So again, if you remember your cake picture and I eat 1/2 and you eat 1/2, the whole cake's gone. So we've got a whole here that we're gonna add. 4 plus 1 equals 5. So we've got 5 teaspoons of baking powder. The interesting thing, and to make it a little more simple, instead of measuring out 5 teaspoons of the baking powder, in Baker's math here and conversions, I've got a little chart here. We know that if you come here, 1 tablespoon equals 3 teaspoons. So if we take 3 of these teaspoons to make 1 tablespoon, 1 and a capital T there is usually for a tablespoon, you're left 5, and you've taken 3 of those teaspoons away, you're left with 2. So you're going to add 2 teaspoons, which are your remaining teaspoons. So here we've got 1 tablespoon plus 2 teaspoons.
So real quick, Laura, you have these in front of you.
Yes.
Let's kind of show them what a tablespoon and a teaspoon, because a lot of times people kind of get confused.
Absolutely.
Which tool would you use for a tablespoon? Which would you use for a teaspoon?
So here, the biggest one typically on your measuring for your spoons is a tablespoon. And then your other most common used is a teaspoon. So when we know that we need 5 teaspoons, we can visualize 3 of them going into here and then 2 into here.
So we would use only 1 of the large.
Correct.
And then we would do 2.
So let's show that we can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's 5 teaspoons.
Or we can do.
Or we can do 1 tablespoon. So we know that's equivalent to 3 teaspoons. And we've got 2 remaining teaspoons left.
Well, Laura, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for allowing us to come into your home today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And showing us how easy fractions really can be, especially in baking.
And it's a lot funner when you get a cake out of the deal.
Now, if people need to contact you, where can they reach you
Yeah,
at?
just feel free to reach me with any baking questions, any math questions at laura@bakersoutpost.com.
Again, thank you so much. And that's it today for Baker's Outpost and with Laura Journey.